Hello. Well, I don't work in Western Africa, but in Congo, that wouldn't be a very good reception either. No. Wow. What an introduction. I wasn't expecting. I had forgot to mention my time with Ben Ho, but one of my great mentors. In fact, several of my mentors would be in the room here. In fact, people, they stole all my speeches, but I can't blame them because I use their books as textbooks in our programs. So I have to give them credit. I guess they're their ideas. I guess I'll follow the pattern and give you a little bit of background on myself. Earlier, Terry was talking about his upbringing and life as a Baptist and how they rejected the holistic gospel in exchange for the bare gospel message of salvation. And when I was growing up, I was kind of on the other side of that equation. I was raised at an appropriate technology institute from the time I was, I think, 10 years old. And so I grew up around a lot of the greats of appropriate technologists and development workers and missionaries from, I think, 190-something countries. A lot of interaction with cross-cultural things and just involved in the whole subject of missions and more specifically community development pretty much all my life. And as that organization changed later on and became part of the casualties of the short-term missions movement that has kind of supplanted development work, we stepped into that and tried to Jesse, come help. Stepped in and tried to fill that void by starting ADAPTech. So we are an organization with an emphasis on applied practical technology. ADAPTech stands for Advancing Development with Applied Practical Technology. And as you can tell, I'm not much of a computer guy. So when I say technology, I'm not talking about web browsers and all that stuff. Jesse, my youngest son, is the technology genius, and with the big T, I guess, there. So I'll move on from that, but Daryl was talking about the philosophy of generalization and the need for study across the schools of study and fields of study. I didn't finish the university because of that. I got kind of bored at Auburn. I bounced around in majors several times, and I was a pre-med math major with a minor in chemistry and a minor in philosophy. So I spent 5 years doing that, and it just wasn't working, so I just went on to other things. I married a girl from the heart of Houston, Texas, and then I eventually got her to move with me to a horse and buggy community with no electricity and no running water, and so we've been a lot of different places in life there. Generalization. I see a huge need for that in our society even now. America, everywhere you go, you hear nobody knows how to do anything anymore. Then the young people can't even make change anymore, right? And it's true, I suppose. You probably hear, many of y'all know a lot of people who, if you handed them a chicken, could go and turn it into supper. Or if you said, there's some beans out there, go get them ready and make supper. There's probably many people that you know that can do that, but across our country, there are fewer and fewer people who actually are capable of such things. So we see a need in that for training locally and in here at home, but also for developing missionaries and giving practical skill sets in a generalized way. So before I came to follow the Bible, back when I was growing up in the missionary world and was not really living as a Christian, I had a vision for child training and training in general, which was shaped a lot by a very secular person's quote. He's a science fiction writer, and I don't recommend anything at all. You could probably just not even look him up. But this one quote really shapes and catches the essence of our training philosophy. So a human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, which I can't do, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects. Now, when I had my back surgery a couple years ago, I was very happy to have a very qualified, very specialized specialist. So I don't agree with him that specialists are all as insects. But in a general sense, development work does require, I think, undoubtedly, a very broad spectrum education and training skill set. Whether you're working in evangelism or any of the fields we've heard talked about. I don't want to cover old ground because they've spent so much of their valuable time, or everybody's time, doing it. And I could say the same things they've said, and I have to say amen to everything I've heard this morning. All three of the men, whom I've never met until today, each one have been quite influential in my life and in my ministry and in our church, actually. But that's other stuff. So when Daryl was talking, my children were looking at me smiling, and when he finished, Luke asked me, "So what are you going to talk about?" So on our pamphlet, which you can find back there on the table, it says our vision. Under vision, it says, "We believe that Jesus taught that his church would be concerned with the physical, social, emotional, and economic." I just started wearing glasses 3 days ago for reading, so I don't know how to do it yet. And I actually made these in a class I went to get certified in making glasses. So 15 years ago I made these glasses, and now I'm using them. Where was I? We believe that Jesus taught that his church would be concerned with the physical, social, emotional, and economic, as well as the spiritual needs of the poor. For proof of that, I'd refer you back to Matthew 25, which was mentioned this morning. Remember the goats on the right and the left? And we also believe that it is God's desire that people who do not know God should come to know him by way of the gospel message of Jesus Christ. And here's the key that I'm getting at, or the point I'm getting at. We believe that these two principal teachings work together as we seek to help people learn to meet their own practical needs in the name of Jesus Christ. So those two things, and Daryl already covered that ground very, very well, and I won't spend a whole lot more time on that, but that's kind of core to what we do and what we believe. That how do you share God's love with hungry people, with hurting people, if you're not concerned with that holistic, what did you call it, the social gospel? Yeah, it's a very Baptist term. I was saying I grew up on the other side of that. I grew up in the Methodist world, which essentially threw out the gospel part and took on the humanitarian side in an extreme way. So that all we're concerned about is building schools and hospitals and sharing God's love in practical ways. But we never really got around to talking about Christ and saving souls and sharing the gospel. So, all right. Our mission, I've got a list of things here I'll quickly run through. Live out the good side of Matthew 25, because remember there's two sides. Train development workers, aid workers, senders, and others who are seeking to learn how to help the poor. Promote competence of poverty-stricken people to provide for their own basic needs and to advance their technological and economic development. Just doing, lifestyle enhancement or quality of life improvements doesn't quite get you there. We have to have a focus on the economic also, I believe. I've come to believe more and more. We want to bridge the gap between theory and practical application of technology. So there's often a big gap between the academia, the engineering world, and the practical on-the-ground guy at the end user. How does he take that and connect the two? And that's a pretty big leap sometimes. I have to kind of live in two different worlds. And then also we want to, with technology, we keep in mind most technology is developed for people with money. The incentive for the development of technology, almost all of it, is profits. And you're not going to build, if you're interested in profits, you're not going to build a product that the people who are going to use can't afford to buy. So technology that only serves the poor is hard to get developed. So we try to work in that. We want to research and develop underused or forgotten technologies for application on the electricity and petroleum limited mission field. So petroleum is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. We here in America don't realize how fortunate we are to have cheap energy, and most of the world is not like that. And there are a lot of technologies out there that have been set aside because something a little bit better came along, but those things still work. You know, the age-old example is steam. Steam still does what steam does. The laws of physics didn't change. In fact, the metallurgy and the products and the fasteners and the glues and the adhesives and all that all got better. So it's easier to do stuff that was set on a shelf in 1885. It's way easier to do it now than it was back then. And it's still useful and still possible to do those things, some of them. And we consult and network with other worthy organizations to add to their capabilities in the field. And that's our interaction in the field. We want it to be that way when we're actually in the field. We want to work with that partnership that is already doing all of that groundwork that was talked about earlier so much because nobody can do everything. So I used to think I could, but then I got older and my body stopped agreeing with that as much. So what we do training. Well, these were the 5 points that we started our vision when we started. We want to do training, and we do that quite a bit with universities, with other organizations locally. If I can find my list. Tim had so many African proverbs I can't keep track of them. So we do a lot of training with missionaries, development works, aid workers, refugee workers, short and long-term preparation for mission development works, mission groups, universities, seminaries, Peace Corps types, sending agents. And by that I mean we believe we have a special heart to train and connect the church senders, the pastors, the committee members, the mission board, get them trained at least at an entry level the same way as the missionary would be, so that they understand and they don't have that clash between well, why aren't you sending us reports about results? You've been there for 3 weeks already, that kind of thing, or 3 months already, or whatever. So we'd like to reach out to them too. And I also have a vision to train, and I've had some contacts with a few different ones, but when the wars were all happening, I wanted to get more involved with some of the military personnel. So I thought if we could train the military to go to the foreign country and help the poor by teaching them how to build rocket stoves and stop breathing smoke or something, then we'd be, kind of using the enemy against himself, and that would be useful. So that was kind of one of them sneaky things. But I've had some contacts with some DOD types. All right, then we do consulting. That's kind of what we've had some organizations working in the field, or some native national groups that will say, hey, we hear you do this kind of stuff. Come look at what we have and just give us ideas what we could do with this, what's possible, And we went to Congo to do that most recently, in southern Congo, and we're doing tests with their clay to see about making clay roof tiles to replace the thatch roofing that does so much damage with the burning that they have to do with that. And I know I'm rushing through here, but research and development, that's what you're going to hear about today. Some of those projects we take, like I said, we take old tech or old ideas or new ones, we take a problem, missionary group or a development group asks, hey, we have this need, can you look into building something? So we were contacted by this group to check into what could be done to drive dugout canoe engines in the Amazon with something other than gasoline, because since Colombia and Venezuela are collapsing so badly, that gasoline is very, very hard to come by. It kind of surprises me. When I worked in Venezuela, gasoline was 9 cents a gallon there, and they were driving 8-barrel carburetor, 2 4-barrel carburetors on 1960s muscle cars and for taxis. But that's not the case anymore. So work with that. We do a lot of things with, I'll get into that in a minute. All right, so those are the 3 we're actively working in. There were 2 others. Tech production for market. We had the vision of, building rocket stoves and water purifiers and water pumps and gasifying trucks and selling them and all that, but we just haven't had the time. And the other thing is to produce literature on all of this stuff as text materials, reference materials, how-to manuals, and that kind of thing, which I'd love to get to, but I don't ever seem to have time to write, so I never get to that, but maybe later on we'll get to that. All right, so we're very big on generalization. This is just a scene of one of our teaching facilities. Just a couple ideas. There's a rocket drum oven up there. There's a few bucket stoves, water purification here, bucket stoves, the nesting top load updraft. It's actually a charcoal retort, but we use it for a cook stove. That's the stove sawdust cooker, I think, made out of a ammo can. There's a gasifier stove for making cooking gas out of a army gas can. This is a biogas pressurizer. We were asked about spinning technology, pedal power stuff. One of my mentors invented this engine called continuous slip drive, named Dale Fritz. He was a missionary in Afghanistan for a whole long time, back in the 1950s, I believe. The pressed bricks, there's some back there, are made to replace adobe that falls apart really easily in earthquakes and things. So that's a pressed brick. Solar cooker, sprayed concrete sprayers, chicken plucker. That's a biosand filter. So it's in my opinion, the best water filter in the world, made out, or simple one anyway, made out of concrete, gravel, sand, and a little piece of pipe, and possibly a seashells if you don't have gravel. And then that hanging here, that's an evaporative cooler for arid climates, so you can put vegetables and things in there and cool them using the wind to evaporate water. There's a rocket stove. The inventor of the rocket stove was one of my mentors. Larry Winiarski trained us for a lot of years in the rocket stove. There's one back there and some information about it. But a lot of people don't know that. Now, people argue with me now. They say it's the fifth, but it's either the fourth or fifth leading cause for death for women in the world is, I think it still is, indoor air pollution from cooking fires. So if we can clean up the smoke, which the rocket stove, in my opinion, does the best. There are about 7 million or so rocket stoves in the world, according to the World Health Organization. And Dr. Larry died last year, right? So, it's a great loss. Another one of our teaching pavilions, and the mechanic shop part. We do some vocational training, welding, mechanicking, that kind of thing also. And that's not a very good picture, but that's where the gasifier got built, so I guess it doesn't matter. This is our new classroom we just built the first 2 weeks of this year. And these underneath are 2 wood gas trucks that drive on firewood. Irrigation systems, a vineyard, gardens, sprayed eco-shell dome structures that are built without using iron or steel and are very strong to hurricane winds. So you imagine a place that gets a hurricane and they lose all their infrastructure every 10 or 15 years or 20 years in the Caribbean or something. How does a people develop if their houses are always blowing down and they're having to rebuild them? So these are gasifiers, it's biogas units, different anaerobic gasifiers. And this is a gas unit that runs the house septic through to produce burnable gas, which is really hard, by the way. I have this one here because of the verse. It's kind of our theme verse. It says, "And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that ye, always having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work." So God is able to, generalization. There's a lot of alls and everys in there. We kind of take this from the making you fishers of men and combining that idea of using practical compassion to make friends to the gospel and make believers, or to be used by God so he can make believers, I guess. It's an acronym, We Fish. We spell it with 2 H's, and we always start at the end because these are what we see to be the basic needs for development. So hope is our first one, even though we list it last because it fits the acronym better. But the kingdom gospel, in our opinion, is the only true hope that can bring about real development. The others are more practical, tangible anyway. Not that there's not a lot that's practical about the gospel, but water, energy, food, income, shelter, health, and sanitation are the others. All these are just areas that we work in, and there's probably some more that I haven't listed there. Water purification and protection and pumps and transport, irrigation, food. We do sustainable agriculture, but not nearly as well as the folks at Echo and some others that I'm sure Clint can outdo us here for sure and show. So we don't focus a whole lot on food training in agriculture, except for how it interacts with technology. So we do a lot with technology, food preservation technology, cooking technology. Income, everybody needs an income, so how can we turn something into a business? And also, once you do that, how do people who've never had a business or money, how do they manage that? How do they manage money? That's always a high high calling. Shelter, like I mentioned, some alternative construction stuff. It also includes clothing, spinning technology, fiber making, and then health and sanitation, improved latrines. We focus on a urine diversion system that eliminates insect vectoring and also most of the odor, and also produces a urea product. And some parts of the world can be sold for industry. Nutrition, we teach Leaf for Life. Another one of my mentors is Dave Kennedy, who worked for a long time with Leaf for Life. It's a process of extracting micronutrients from green leaf products and supplementing that into diets that don't have enough of that, and also a concentrate version that's fed to starvation cases. So I hope I didn't spend too much time on all that, but energy. So that's what we're here to talk about today. It's kind of our specialty, the thing we're most involved with, probably the most passionate about. Is kind of our niche. There are somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 what they're considered everyday drivers in North America who drive around in a vehicle on firewood, and Jacob and I are two of them, and so that's a pretty specialized niche. 15 out of 350 million is pretty specialized, and we're not advocating that we can take wood gasified vehicles to the mission field meaningfully. It's very complicated as a development project, but we do believe there's there's a void there, and there's a place for gasification on the mission field and in a development field that has been misplaced in exchange for easy petroleum, right? But probably everybody in this room would agree that local's better than distant, right? Locally grown produce is more beneficial to societies and development movements than importing your lettuce from Argentina, right? It's better to buy it from your neighbor down the street. So the same principle is true with your energy needs. If you can produce it yourself, it might be better. Now we have the power grid and we use it. Tallapoosa River Electric Cooperative is very cheap and easy, and we use it very much, but we would also like to be able to produce our own. And in places where it's not possible to buy electricity or gasoline, propane or something, or where the cost is prohibitive, then if someone can go into the jungle and make a fuel for their engine, they might be, it's a big might, everything's circumstantial and situational, but it might be a benefit. So we deal with direct and passive solar. We've been working on black diesel, using waste engine oils and stuff for fuels. We're interested in converting plastics to diesel or oils. The old standbys of wind and water and pedal power and steam and biogas. And I worked years ago when I was a teenager. I worked with, his name was Steve Vanek, and he was out of Villanova University, and he was developing a solar refrigeration system that didn't use any pumps. So it didn't have any compressors, just using a single cycle evaporation condensation system, just using chemicals. And I want to get back into that. All right, so let's talk about gasification. Gasification, most people, when I say this, most people say, so you're running on steam. Not really, no. Gasification is a process of staged or choked combustion. So if you were to make a fire and then starve it of oxygen by not allowing enough air into it, then you would produce a lot of smoke, right? Everybody lit a fire, probably everybody in this room knows more about fire than 99% of the people that I teach. So if I'm talking down to you, please don't take it personally. When you add heat to a biomass, carbon-based matter, wood, charcoal, cardboard, and it's smoking, but it's not flaming, what do you do to it? You blow on it, right? Why? It adds oxygen. So one of your reasons might be that you lack oxygen. So in gasification, we want to take that principle, that idea, and do it intentionally in a controlled way. So another definition might be a simpler one: conversion of a solid matter into a gas. So if I turn this podium here into smoke, I'm either vaporizing it or I'm gasifying it. Very similar processes. Combustion, another fancy word for, not as fancy as rapid oxidation, but a fancy word for burning, right? So everybody, fire is a chemical reaction within a substance, usually precipitated by the addition of heat. So most firefighters will tell you fuel plus oxygen plus an ignition source makes a fire, right? If you anybody here have a cutting torch? All right, so you take some acetylene, or we use propane, and you squirt it into a balloon, and then you take some oxygen and you squirt it into the balloon. And if you get equal parts propane and oxygen, and then you stick a cigarette lighter to it, what happens? You have a fire really fast, right? So there you have a gasified fuel supply, carbon-based fuel supply with oxygen and ignition, you end up with fire. So when we have a building catches fire, what do? We put water on it, right? Water on a fire removes heat, kills the fire. Or it starves it of oxygen, kills the fire. Fire goes out, right? And these are, I forgot to mention, these four here are just some, pointers maybe about fire that help to understand fire a little better and to be able to make a better one. So the second one, biomatter must boil before it can burn. So this podium, I can't really burn this piece of wood. You can't really burn that chair. You first have to heat it up until it boils. Then that boiled gas will mix with oxygen to create a fuel and then burn. So the only difference between this piece of wood and a canister of propane, well, the only difference, that's a big statement, but a difference between this piece of wood and a canister of propane is the propane exists in a gaseous form at room temperature, and this piece of wood exists in a solid form, right? So if I hit you with propane, you'll smell it, you won't like it, but if I hit you with this, you like it a lot less. So that has to do with the phases of solid, gas, and liquid, right? And that has to do with temperature. If you heat this piece of wood up hot enough, you'll end up with a gas, right? It'll boil. And the same thing's true with propane. If you cool it off enough, you'll end up with a liquid. That's why we have liquid propane in a tank. It's liquid when it's in there, and when we let it out where it doesn't have as much pressure on it, it boils. All right, so important thing is biomatter must boil before it can burn. I've had university students never touched a match, never used a shovel, never swung a hammer, never did anything. We're trying to teach them how to cook a grilled cheese sandwich on a rocket stove. And a lot of them haven't ever seen a spatula. and this one girl, she said, from Tuskegee University, said, do you have what's that called? A spatula. She was talking about a spatula. But her friend took a 2x4 and held it up with a cigarette lighter and tried to light a 2x4 on fire with a cigarette lighter. Now, everybody knows that's not a work, right? It would take a lot of cigarette lighters to get a 2x4 to burn. All right, so complete combustion, that's a term. Just means an efficient, clean fire. If we want to remove the smoke from that woman's kitchen, instead of having that 3-stone fire on the floor we want to clean that up and have complete combustion. That means using all the fuel that's there. Do y'all have chicken houses up here? Y'all have chicken houses? I bet we have a lot of chicken houses in Alabama. And they even sing songs about how many chicken houses we have, chicken trucks that we have in Alabama. And ever seen a log truck or chicken truck going down the highway and black smoke's pouring out about the stack? Well, that's diesel fuel, right? Well, that's an incomplete combustion. Right? He's pumping fuel out in the air that he's not burning. But if we have complete combustion, we'll end up with carbon dioxide. Everybody heard that term? That's what's in fire extinguishers. That's what you're breathing out, that plants, a lot of you farmers will know that CO2 is what you need for farmers or for plants to eat. It's also what we use as an inert gas when we're welding with a MIG welder, maybe to blow the oxygen out of the way so oxygen doesn't contaminate the weld. So carbon dioxide, water, and heat. That's basically what you end up with if you have really clean burn, complete combustion. And the other thing I just mentioned about the diesel smoke, visible smoke. If you see smoke that's not transparent heat waves, but actual smoke particles, that is unburned fuel particles in the air. That's fuel that you didn't use. Now, for you and me, if we have a big old lot of hardwood trees and we got more trees than we could ever burn, or if we live in the Amazon, maybe that doesn't matter. If we're in Haiti and we're spending 60% of our income on charcoal just to cook our food, that's a big deal, right? Because every little bit. Do you want to have a car that gets 3 miles a gallon or 30 miles a gallon? And why, right? Because fuel's not 9 cents a gallon in Venezuela anymore, right? So if you see visible smoke, that's unburned fuel. And if you have tons of it, that's okay. But if you really need to save on your fuel supply, or if you want to have really clean exhaust, you need to try to get it as clean as possible. So the process of controlled gasification, if we take a biomass like wood, we add heat in a limited oxygen environment. That's key. You end up with unburned flammable molecules in a gaseous form. So molecules that are ready to be burned, like propane is or carbon monoxide is. Can you give me some water, Jacob, or something? Just you end up with water vapor, and you end up with large molecule droplets like tars and oils and nasty stuff. Y'all would probably recognize most of that and call it creosote. All right, so wood gasification, if we take wood and pyrolyze it, run it through pyrolysis, which means it's a fancy word for heating it up, you end up with wood gas. All right, that's what we run our big engines on. Wood gas is also known as synthesis gas or producer gas. And the joke is it's, we're making syngas. But syngas and heat and ash and soot, tar and water. And that gas is 30 to 60% carbon monoxide, which is flammable. 25 to 30% hydrogen, which comes from the water, and that's flammable. 5% methane, which is flammable. That's that biogas stuff, biodigester. And 5 to 15% carbon dioxide, which is not flammable. So we want to reduce that as much as we can. So we have to find a way to get rid of those things: water, heat, tar, ash, and soot. All right, so the ash, we dump it out. The soot, we filter it out, usually using straw or hay as a filter or cloth. Tar, we gutter it into a tank, or some of it actually goes deeper into the gasifier and gets burned up more, broken down. The heat gets radiated to the atmosphere, just like, blowing wind on something, or in the case of the boat, it ends up in the lake because we run it through the water. Or we use that heat to preheat the air that's going into the gasifier so that the air that's hitting that wood or that charcoal in there is already at 900 to 1,000 degrees to start that process. The water gets drained off as a condensate, and a small portion of it gets cracked with the excess heat into hydrogen and oxygen gas, both of which burn. So to operate a wood gas system, you have to cut your wood and dry it. You feed the wood into the hopper. You put intake air in there after you light it. You make wood gas that leaves the gasifier, and the water, tars, ash, and heat is collected and transferred to all the places where they need to go. The gas goes into some cooling rails where it shrinks. Everything in this universe that I know of that cools off gets smaller except for ice. So it'll take up less space if we cool it, and also it'll dry it out. The water, kind of like your air conditioner dries the air out in your basement. Same principle. We filter it through a simple medium like cloth or straw, and then we pipe it to the engine. In the trucks we use PVC pipe or hoses, and then we mix it. The operator or the pilot or the driver mixes it with air from the atmosphere and oxygen from the atmosphere, kind of as a manual carburetor, which it sounds a lot more complicated than it is. It's actually just a water ball valve, usually. All right, so which one do we want, wood or char? So wood gas, we take raw wood. Char gas, we take charcoal already and put them into two different kinds of devices. The drawbacks and benefits are listed there. Some of the biggest ones would be the fuel is easy. Cutting up firewood and drying is pretty simple. We all pretty much all do that already. To produce charcoal is a complicated or labor-intensive process. Charcoal makes a better fuel once it's made, but wood, if you have a limited supply of wood, to make charcoal you waste about 60% of your energy. So it's kind of a trade-off. Which one's more important to you? If you have plenty of wood, you have a truss shop or something, and you want to cook your tails and scraps into charcoal and use it, then that might be something easy enough. But if you have to buy wood, then you got a different issue there. Wood gas, you have to deal with tar and water, lots and lots of water, and then you have to carry that around with you, all that water and weight. So you have to load your truck up with all this weight. With charcoal, you've gotten rid of all that, and you're just left with really, really refined fuel material. So wood gas is good for big engines. Char gas, we think, is better for small engines. I'm going to skip that one. This is a charcoal making process that we use. One of our friends came up with this, Gary Gilmore, out of Pennsylvania, actually. And it's essentially an open top drum with a hole in the bottom with a screen. And this other one's a half drum. It's an afterburner. You light it at the top and it burns down. When it gets to the bottom, the flame changes color. You know it's time to quench it. You dump it into an airtight drum and seal it up and let it cool off. It'll burn up the oxygen in the barrel and it'll go out. This is some construction debris from the new classroom. I thought the screw was interesting there in the middle. Then you have to process it into size, so you can use a hammer and break it up. Or we have here's a video. This is a small amount. Jacob, a number of years ago, built a device using an old exercise bike to grind charcoal. So this is a short video of that. Not as short as I thought. So if the charcoal's too big, too much air can get around it, and you end up with too much oxygen downstream. You gotta have it the right size. So this breaks it into the size we want. And then we sift it, run it through a screen. Somehow we have one that we use for sand for making bricks. So it's got a vibrating motor on it, but you can do it with a handheld screen like this. The little stuff falls out. The bigger stuff ends up in the gasifier. The fines are left, and they become biochar or go to the latrines or something to be used for fertilizer somewhere. All right, so charcoal gasification process. Charcoal is just the carbon that's left out of the tree, right? That's what it absorbs from the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, turns it into wood. Carbon plus ignition plus limited oxygen equals carbon monoxide and a lot of heat, So charcoal can be used in a blacksmith forge to melt steel, right? So if you put light charcoal on fire and blow on it hard enough, you're going to melt your gasifier into a big pile of slag on the floor. So we have to cool that off, and that heat is actually a resource to make more fuel. So we take that and we do one of two things. Either we feed exhaust gases back into it and crack that carbon dioxide into carbon monoxide and reburn it again, or what we like to do is take water, because we just think it's a whole lot of fun to say we're burning water. Take water and feed it in there, cools off the reaction, but splits that water into hydrogen and oxygen and cools it off. You end up with less heat. So that hydrogen is very flammable. Everybody remember the Hindenburg and all that. So there's the gasifier on the back of the boat, the one sitting back here in the corner. This system is the first one we've built like this. We know one person that built one in Slovenia, and so Jacob modified it a little bit, and we've got it on the boat now. Those are the filter media is straw, and like I said before, that's our air adjustment, so just a plastic ball valve. For those that won't be around tomorrow, there's the engine connected to the gasifier with a vacuum cleaner hose. The carburetor mixing box is made out of some old red cedar boards, and we have some sanitary fittings there, and pretty much the whole gasifier is sitting there on that table. So all the parts, you can go back here and look at it. And here's the engine running the other day. For those who may not be at the lake tomorrow, here's my wife, Erica. So I think that's it. One thing I will mention, that drive system, Jacob had never seen one. I said, Jake, you think you can build one of those? He said, I think so. So he went to the shop and spent 2.5 days and built a drive unit from a photograph. And it worked first time out the gate. So this was the first gasifier that we've ever built that did not work first time we tried it. We had a lot of goings to get it right, but I think we finally did. And this has just been, I don't know, somebody called me 5 weeks ago maybe. So we worked on it. I think we've got about 8-9 days in it right now. So we're doing well that way. However, before everybody gets excited about taking it to the field, remember there's a lot of testing that needs to be done before we can send this to the field, but we're on the way to that. So I guess that's questions.
5 minutes for questions.
Talk too much.
You so this is just a regular converted gasoline engine.
Mm-hmm.
So you could also run it on other things.
Run.
Like you could convert any gasoline engine to this.
Any is a big word. You kind of need to not have a plastic intake manifold. So that some of the modern engines have plastic intake manifolds. You might have to replace that because that will occasionally have a puff or a reaction and catch fire, and you'll melt it down. But otherwise, yeah, if for the most part, yeah, you can. There's some of the most modern vehicles, I don't know that anybody's tried it on, but we can do it on OBD2 computer system trucks, and we use Dodge Dakotas from the mid 90s. That's our favorite because it's the easiest. It's a big truck, or a big engine, small truck, with the V8 318s in them. But yeah, the other thing is two-stroke engines is a little difficult because it's hard to oil. The gas is not, I mean, I guess it could be figured out, but we haven't. So chainsaws or something, you want to start with a four-stroke engine, probably.
Okay, and what other fuel could you use besides wood? If you were in a country where wood wasn't very common.
Theoretically, I mean, we run a lot of plastics with our wood, and when I'm on the side of the road driving, I'll pick up those pieces of rubber tire and throw a few of them in there. That gives you an octane boost. But you know, old dead cats and armadillos and that kind of stuff. But I got a friend in Texas that gasified an alligator one time. But it's the physical structure of the wood makes the wood the best. Now it's conceivable that you could gasify sawdust and cottonseed hulls and leaves and all that stuff. But if you have leaves and tar, or leaves and bark, you make more tar, and that's harder to deal with. So.
Thank you. You may be interested to know, I worked for John Deere for 20 years, and in the 70s, John Deere built a gasifier, and they had hoped that it would be the on-farm energy source for many, many things. Mm-hmm. And I talked to some of the engineers who worked on it, and I said, why did you quit? It seemed like it was really promising, and even President Carter and his wife came over and poured a batch of corn cobs in it and saying this was the best thing since sliced bread during the 70s, during the oil crisis. And I said, in all my research on it, I've never been able to find out, why did John Deere quit? And the old guy said, you know what? We started seeing this stuff drip out the bottom, and we got really scared of it. Well, it was creosote. Here again, they were engineers, but they were not, they were too specialized. They were not generalized to know that that was creosote, which had been dealt with, 100 years before by a guy named Oliver Evans in the late 1700s. Long story short, they quietly quit the whole project. Mm-hmm. But today we know that that could have been a very successful project. Mm-hmm. One more question. Have you ever considered using big pop-pop boats instead of going to internal combustion engines?
The coil. Yeah. Larry Winiarski, the rocket stove inventor, that was one of his favorite things for a workshop, was to teach the little steam pop coil. Yeah, so essentially it's a coil with two ends of tubing and stick in the water, and you heat up the coil in the middle, fill it up with water, and as it expels that steam and then cools, it continually sucks and blows out one and then the other. Yeah. I haven't thought about it on a large scale, to be honest with you.
They've actually built some trowel. Also, two-stroke engines were successfully used by the Lance Bulldog tractor company in Germany in World War II. They built thousands of them. Yep. But it was a very specialized two-cycle engine. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, on that, the Nazis actually had some gasifiers on some of their planes, their training planes. And most of the civilian vehicles in Europe during World War II were driven on some kind of wood gas system. Ford and General Motors both made them commercially during the Depression. So I think that's it and all the time we have.
Real fast.
Okay.
Do you have to do anything special to the carburetors?
We either bypass the carburetor or just go straight through it. You have to turn off your gasoline somehow. We usually use a rheostat knob so we can turn it back on when we want some. But if it's an actual carburetor, for that reason we like fuel injection better than carburetors. But yeah, that's all the time they're gonna give me.
There are some people that don't. You haven't done a whole lot with it because they really need to work. They haven't done a whole lot with water. Might be something water in there by hand.
For the specific purpose and
And a little bit of it probably.